Your stomach right now, while you're sitting here, is about as acidic as battery acid. pH of around 1.5, sometimes lower. If you put a drop of your stomach acid on a piece of paper, it would burn a hole through it. That's the baseline. That's what your body maintains so it can do what stomachs do. Dissolve things, kill bacteria, start breaking down protein with an enzyme called pepsin. It's a very hostile environment by design. And it has to be. The alternative is that your food just sits there, bacteria proliferate, you get sick. Now, when you drink coffee first thing in the morning without water, you're not really thinking about what happens to that liquid the moment it hits your stomach. You're thinking about caffeine. You're thinking about waking up. You're thinking about that first hit of alertness. What you're not thinking about is that your stomach just got flooded with something that's moderately acidic, yes, but also something that contains compounds that are going to trigger even more acid secretion. Caffeine, in particular, stimulates the release of gastrin, which is a hormone that tells your stomach to make more acid. So you've got a chemical reaction happening. Your stomach is making decisions based on what just arrived. It's reading the caffeine as a signal to produce more of what it already makes. But here's the thing about water, and this is the part that actually matters for the physiological cascade. When you drink water before the coffee, something immediate happens. Your stomach pH rises. Not dramatically, not for long, not permanently. But within maybe 60 seconds, and there's research on this, an actual study that looked at it with pH probes inserted into people's stomachs. The pH rises measurably. The water isn't reducing the acid. That's a misconception. The water is increasing the volume in your stomach, which dilutes the acid concentration. It's like adding more water to a mixture. The percentage of acid goes down. The absolute amount of acid is still there, still doing its job, but it's spread out over a larger volume now. And that matters for what comes next. That matters significantly because what comes next is absorption. And this is where most people have this completely backwards. Caffeine absorption is not some passive process where it just moves across your stomach lining regardless of conditions. Absorption is pH dependent. It's sensitive to pH. There's a study, I think it was done in the 1980s, somewhere in that era. The exact year escapes me, but I remember the numbers, where they looked at caffeine absorption at different pH levels. At pH 1.0, the stomach's normal deep acidity, absorption was almost nothing, negligible. As the pH increased, absorption increased steadily. By pH 7, which is neutral water, caffeine absorption peaked at around 21.5% of the dose. Now, you're not going to get your stomach to pH 7. That's not going to happen. You're too acidic. Your stomach is designed to be too acidic. But the point is clear and it's inarguable. Caffeine absorption is sensitive to pH. It's not the same across all conditions. It's not constant. So when you drink water first, you've bought yourself a slightly higher pH environment for the first minute or two. Your coffee hits that environment instead of hitting a completely acidic baseline. The water has already diluted the acid. And even though the water moves through your stomach and into your small intestine pretty quickly, about 80 to 90 seconds in the fasted state, that's been measured. The coffee comes in behind it. Your stomach hasn't reset back to baseline. There's still more volume in there. There's still a slightly less acidic environment than if you just drunk the coffee cold on an empty, acid-soaked stomach. This isn't complicated chemistry, it's just dilution. This affects bioavailability. This affects how much caffeine actually makes it into your bloodstream and when. Caffeine absorption is fast regardless. It's nearly 99% absorbed from your digestive tract eventually, but the rate changes. The timing changes. And if you're drinking coffee because you want the effect, because you want to feel something, timing matters. If you want to actually feel something in your body, you need the caffeine to reach your bloodstream in a window where your body is primed to notice it. That window is not the same as a window where caffeine is simultaneously triggering more gastric acid secretion and making your stomach feel like it's churning and contracting. Now let's talk about what happens once it's absorbed, because this is where the real mechanism gets interesting and kind of beautiful in how your body coordinates all of this. Your blood isn't a uniform fluid. It has a certain volume. It has a certain osmotic pressure. It has a certain concentration of everything circulating in it. Sodium, potassium, glucose, hormones, neurotransmitters, gases. When you're dehydrated, and most people are mildly dehydrated first thing in the morning, just from sleeping 8 hours without drinking anything. Your mouth is dry for a reason. Your plasma volume is lower. Your blood is slightly more concentrated. Your osmotic pressure is higher. This matters because caffeine, once it's absorbed from your digestive tract, distributes throughout your body based on water volume. Some caffeine binds to proteins in your blood, particularly to a protein called albumin, but a significant portion of it doesn't bind. A significant portion circulates free. The distribution depends on how much fluid you have to distribute into. If you've drunk water first, your plasma volume is up. You have more fluid in your bloodstream. The same amount of caffeine is now distributed into a larger volume. This isn't dilution exactly, though that's close. But it is a change in concentration. The peak concentration in your blood will be slightly lower if you started with water. That peak concentration is part of what creates the caffeine effect. It's not the only thing. It's not even close to the only thing, but it's part of it. And this is the actual reason, the physiological reason why people often say water before coffee makes the effect gentler. It's not gentle in a bad way. It's that the peak is less sharp. The concentration gradient is less steep. Your nervous system encounters it in a less aggressive way. There's also the vasopressin system. And vasopressin is something that almost nobody understands, even though it controls something fundamental about how your body works. Caffeine is a mild diuretic, but everyone misunderstands what that means. Caffeine doesn't make you lose water in the way people think. What it does is affect antidiuretic hormone, which is also called ADH or vasopressin. Vasopressin is a hormone that your brain produces from a structure called the posterior pituitary. And it tells your kidneys to reabsorb water from the filtrate that's being formed. It's essentially a water retention hormone. Caffeine slightly suppresses vasopressin, which means your kidneys reabsorb less water. You produce more urine, you lose more fluid, but this only happens in significant amounts if you're already fairly dehydrated. If you're well hydrated, the effect is minimal. The fluid in your system buffers the diuretic effect. The suppression of vasopressin can't actually cause a net loss because you have fluid to lose without your body becoming dangerously dry. But if you drink coffee on an empty, dehydrated stomach, which is what most people do, they wake up after 8 hours of not drinking anything and immediately have caffeine. You're starting from a deficit. You drink the coffee, caffeine hits your bloodstream, vasopressin gets suppressed, your kidneys change their behavior, water reabsorption goes down. Your kidneys start producing more urine. And now you're working from a place of deficit instead of equilibrium. Water first changes this equation. You're no longer starting from a deficit. You're starting from a place where you've added fluid. Where your body has a little buffer, where the suppression of vasopressin has less impact because you're not already at the edge of dehydration. Your kidneys can suppress reabsorption and still maintain adequate hydration because you gave yourself a cushion. This feeds into the cortisol piece too. And the cortisol piece matters more than people think when they're thinking about why they feel jittery or wired. Your cortisol is naturally highest in the morning. This is correct and healthy. It's supposed to be high. That high cortisol is what wakes you up. It's what gets you moving. It suppresses melatonin. It increases glucose production. It activates your sympathetic nervous system just enough to get you functioning. When you drink caffeine, you get an additional boost to cortisol. This is documented. There's research on this. Caffeine elevates cortisol levels. And for the first 30 minutes or so, that's fine. That's the awakening effect. That's the point. But if your cortisol is already spiked from sleeping and you're adding caffeine on top of it, and you're doing this in a dehydrated state, you're creating a window of elevated sympathetic nervous system activation. Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your muscles tense slightly, you feel a bit jangled, you feel the effect intensely, you feel wired. But if you've drunk water first, a few things change simultaneously. Your body is processing the water. Your kidneys are actively managing a larger fluid load. Your osmoreceptors have detected increased fluid volume, and vasopressin is still high because you're hydrated, not about to be suppressed. Your sympathetic nervous system isn't as aggressively activated because you're not riding the edge of dehydration. The caffeine still elevates cortisol. Yes, absolutely it does. But in a context where your body is already somewhat buffered. The effect is there, but it's not sharp. It's not creating a sudden jolt. And this is the reason, the actual mechanistic reason, that people report feeling more alert, but less wired when they drink water first. They're not getting less caffeine. They're getting the same caffeine, but it's arriving in a body that's in a better position to handle a sympathetic nervous system activation because the body isn't already at a deficit. There's one more piece that's kind of strange and worth thinking about, and it has to do with adenosine receptors and something called sleep pressure. Your brain has adenosine receptors, lots of them. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that builds up as you're awake. It accumulates. The longer you're awake, the more adenosine accumulates in your brain, and the more your adenosine receptors are activated. This activation creates what sleep researchers call sleep pressure. It makes you tired. It makes you want to sleep. It's part of your circadian rhythm, but it's also a direct function of how long you've been awake. 8 hours of sleep reduces adenosine in your brain back down. You wake up with lower adenosine, but it starts accumulating immediately. By the time you drink your coffee, some adenosine has already accumulated. Your receptors are slightly activated. When you drink caffeine, it binds to those same adenosine receptors. It blocks adenosine. It prevents that accumulation from being felt. That's the wakefulness effect. That's how caffeine works. It's not adding energy. It's blocking the signal that tells you that you need sleep. But here's the thing about it that's less known. Adenosine receptors are also responsive to hydration status. When you're dehydrated, your receptor sensitivity changes slightly. Your adenosine receptors are slightly more easily activated. Your sleep pressure, in other words, is slightly increased. Your nervous system is slightly more sensitive to fatigue signals, even though you're about to drink something to suppress them. I don't know if there's a clean study that ties this all together in humans. I suspect there isn't. Sleep physiology is complicated. Adenosine receptor sensitivity is complicated. Hydration effects on receptors are complicated, but the logic is there and it's straightforward. You're dehydrated. Adenosine receptors are more easily activated. Your sleep pressure is higher. You drink coffee to block those receptors. The blocking effect hits a system that was already primed to feel tired. So the contrast is sharper. The jolt is harder. It feels more intense. You feel the effect very acutely. If you've already drunk water, your adenosine receptors are in a baseline state, not a sensitized state. The caffeine still blocks them, but it's not doing it in a system that was already predisposed to fatigue. The effect is more of a genuine increase in alertness rather than a sharp relief from a deficit you've been creating by staying dehydrated. Now let's talk about what most people get wrong about the dehydration and coffee relationship. This is important because the misconception is widespread. People say coffee dehydrates you. This is not really true. The science on this is pretty settled. Multiple meta-analyses have looked at this. Moderate coffee consumption, up to about 3 to 4 cups a day, does not lead to a net loss of body water. The fluid in the coffee accounts for most of the fluid. The diuretic effect of caffeine is mild and is heavily buffered if you're regularly consuming it. Regular coffee drinkers develop tolerance to the diuretic effect. Their body adapts, their kidneys adjust. The effect that you see in acute studies in people given caffeine they're not used to doesn't translate to people who drink coffee regularly. So coffee doesn't dehydrate you. That's not true. But, and this is the important distinction, if you're already mildly dehydrated and you drink coffee before addressing that dehydration, you're not actually becoming more dehydrated, but you're also not addressing the underlying deficit. You're creating a physiological state where a diuretic is being applied to a system that's already running low. Water first changes this. You address the deficit. You create a situation where the caffeine is happening in a hydrated system rather than a dehydrated one. It's not a huge difference. You're not going to feel like a new person. Your personality isn't going to change. But the difference is there. The effect is more stable. The jitter is less pronounced. The crash is less sharp. There's also something happening with gastric motility that's worth understanding. Even though it doesn't change the main picture of how your body processes all of this, coffee doesn't actually speed up your stomach emptying. People think it does. They have the intuition that coffee makes things move faster through your digestive system, but studies show it doesn't. Coffee stimulates acid production and bile secretion and some other digestive enzymes, gastrin and cholecystokinin. But it doesn't make your stomach move faster. It doesn't accelerate the movement of food from your stomach into your small intestine. The muscles of your stomach contract at the same rate. What does affect gastric motility, though, is volume. A larger volume in your stomach triggers slightly different motility patterns. It's not dramatic. Your stomach moves at roughly the same speed, but the pattern of contractions is different. The rhythm is different. The timing of when things pass through the pyloric sphincter, the opening between your stomach and small intestine, changes slightly based on how much is in there. So when you drink water first, you've changed the mechanical context. Your stomach is responding to a larger volume. By the time your coffee arrives, the stomach has already begun processing something. It's not at rest. It's actively in motion. Some of the water has already passed through. The stomach is now receiving coffee into an environment that's already dynamically responding rather than an environment that's at rest and about to suddenly activate. The stomach wall is already contracting. The muscles are already engaged. This is small. This is genuinely a small effect, but it's real. It's measurable. It's part of why people report less stomach upset, less that gnawing feeling in their gut, less that sensation that something is churning when they drink water first. The stomach isn't suddenly activated. It's already in motion. It's already functioning. The acid secretion that coffee triggers is happening in a context where the stomach is already functioning, already moving, already processing something. The shock is absorbed by motion that was already happening. Now, here's the thing that's harder to measure and harder to study, but that I think matters anyway. It might sound speculative, but the mechanism is real. When you drink water on an empty stomach, you're doing something specific to your body's signaling systems. You're sending a signal that you're providing hydration. You're providing fluid. Your body reads that signal. Osmoreceptors in your hypothalamus and in your bloodstream detect that you've increased your fluid volume. They adjust vasopressin, they adjust aldosterone, which is another hormone that affects water retention in your kidneys. They adjust your sense of thirst. All of this happens in background processes that you don't feel consciously. You don't feel your osmoreceptors firing. You don't feel your aldosterone changing, but it's happening. When you then drink coffee, you're doing this in a context where those regulatory systems have already made adjustments. Your body has already said, okay, we have more water now. Let's adjust our baseline. Let's adjust our set point for fluid retention. When the caffeine comes in and tries to suppress vasopressin, it's suppressing something that was already at a higher set point. It's not suppressing from a place of deficit. It's suppressing from a place of relative abundance. Compare that to drinking coffee first. You drink the coffee, caffeine immediately suppresses vasopressin. Your body hasn't had a chance to say, okay, we have more water, let's adjust. It just experiences the immediate suppression of the hormone that keeps you hydrated. Your kidneys respond, you produce more urine, and your body is now playing catch up. Your endocrine system is in a reactive mode instead of a proactive one. This is speculative in the sense that I don't know of a study that's measured this specifically in humans with proper controls. But the mechanism is there. And it matters in the sense that your endocrine system is making decisions based on the information it's receiving. If you give it information first, water, it makes different decisions than if you skip that information and go straight to the caffeine. Your hormones are responding to a different initial condition. What's interesting is that the benefits of drinking water before coffee aren't actually that huge. They're not transformative. People sometimes expect that they're going to feel completely different. They're going to feel energized in a totally new way. They're going to become morning people. That's not going to happen. That's unrealistic. You're going to feel slightly less jittery. Your stomach is probably going to feel better. Your heart rate probably won't spike as dramatically. Your crash later, if you experience one, is probably going to be slightly less sharp. You're going to have more stable energy throughout the morning, but you're not going to become a different person. The caffeine is still doing what it does. Your nervous system is still being stimulated. Your cortisol is still going up. You're still suppressing adenosine. You're still increasing your heart rate and blood pressure. All of those effects are still happening, but they're happening in a body that's already in a better position to handle them. You're not fighting a deficit. The counter-argument that sometimes comes up is that you're just adding water to your day and you'd get the same effect if you drank it later. You'd get the same effect if you drank it after breakfast. And that's partially true. Your hydration status over the course of the day probably matters more than the exact timing of when you drink water relative to coffee. If you're drinking enough water throughout the day, whether you drink some of it before coffee or after coffee probably makes less of a difference than whether you're drinking it at all. That's fair. Over a week, over a month, total water intake matters more. But the mechanism isn't about total hydration. It's about the immediate context. It's about about what state your body is in at the moment the caffeine arrives. It's about whether your osmoreceptors have already made adjustments or whether they're about to have to respond to a diuretic. So yeah, water first. Is it necessary? No. Your body is not going to fail if you skip it. Is it going to harm you to drink coffee without water? Of course not. Most people drink coffee without water first, and they're fine. They function. They have normal lives. They go to work. They pay attention. They interact with other people without incident. They're absolutely fine. But the people who do drink water first and who pay attention to how they feel usually report that they feel different. They feel more stable. They feel less wired. They feel like the energy is steadier. And now you know why. Your stomach acid is slightly more dilute. Your caffeine is being absorbed into a slightly larger blood volume. Your vasopressin is already elevated instead of being about to be suppressed. Your endocrine system has already made some adjustments. Your stomach isn't sitting at rest waiting to suddenly have to deal with an onslaught of gastric stimulation. It's already in motion. It's already processing. Your adenosine receptors aren't in a sensitized state. Your cortisol isn't being elevated in a body that's already running a deficit. These are small effects individually, but together they create a different context for the caffeine. Not a radically different one. Not a life-changing one, but different enough that your body processes the whole thing more smoothly. Different enough that the effect is gentler, but still there. That's what's happening inside.